All right, hello and welcome to KBO Chats Live. I'm Sam Pasco alongside Erik Halterman, and we are breaking down everything you need to know about some KBO action tonight/tomorrow morning, depending on where you're tuning in from around the world. Before we begin, do check out the site rotowire.com/free KBO and our Twitter page at Rotowire KBO to stay updated on everything. Diving right in, before we dive in, I do want to mention too, apologies for the delay, half hour behind. That's on me. It's my fault, guys. But moving right along here into the standings. Sorry, Eric, I know. But, who's not late is the KT Wiz. Well, they were a little late getting to first place, but they're there now. Sole possession there of first place. But they are closely followed behind by the LG Twins and Samsung Lions. All three of those teams are 7-3 in their last 10 games. What do you make of the standings here shaking up a little bit here a couple weeks into June?
Right, so sole possession only if you go by winning percentage. Obviously, they're, I guess they played two fewer games or four fewer games even than the other two. I would really say we've split into three tiers at this point. I would group obviously the Landers just half a game back of those three as tier one. Then you've got the Dinos, Bears, and Heroes seemingly fighting for the final wild card spot, and then the Tigers, Eagles, and Giants who have looked out of it for a while. I would say, though, that groups 1 and 2, I still think there's plenty of time for 2, if not even 3 of the teams in that middle tier to jump up into that top group and finish in the postseason. Given, again, that all 3 of those teams in that middle tier were playoff teams last year with the Dinos and Bears meeting in the Korean series. If you go by run differential, which is something I like to look at really throughout the season, the Dinos and Bears are actually in the top 3 along with, I believe, the Wiz. So by at least one measure, they're as good as any team in the league. I would expect both of them, I think, to make the postseason, even though right now the Bears are slightly out of it.
Yeah, I was going to say the Bears, along with the Kiwoom Heroes, 2 contenders last year, are just 3-7 in their last 10 games. A little cold right now. We'll see what they can muster up now moving into the day's games, moving right along. First up, starting with the former number one, not champs, but number one position holders in the standings, the SSG Landers taking on the Hanwha Eagles. Landers took 2 of 3 against Kia in the series that opened the week, and Hanwha won 3 of 4 in a 4-game series against Lotte. 2 opponents not really that great in Kia and Lotte. But looking at Wilmer Font first, 2 or fewer earned runs in 4 straight, 40 strikeouts in 27 innings pitched. I'd imagine there's a lot to like in here with only just 5 walks during that stretch. He seems to be putting something together that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think there's a real chance Font ends up in the mix as the best pitcher in the league this season. Really didn't look like that after his first start, which was a complete dud against these same Eagles. Went just 2 innings, gave up 4 runs, and seeing the Landers a lack of success with foreign starters last year definitely got me a bit worried that maybe Font was another dud, but certainly doesn't look that way. Even if you don't ignore that start, he has excellent numbers, but if you do, he has a 2.57 ERA and a 0.96 WHIP over 9 starts. Suddenly, he's striking out a ton of guys, too. 9 or more strikeouts in 4 straight starts with a high of 12 a couple starts ago. 29.7% strikeout rate is second among qualified pitchers, and he's paired that with a 7.2% walk rate. So it really is well supported, his low ERA, and I don't see any reason for it to stop tonight against one of the weakest lineups in the league.
Liking Wilmer Font, liking his strikeout action. His opponent, in terms of opposing pitcher, Shiwan Jong of the Hanwha Eagles. He took the loss his last time out, but it was a solid outing overall. 0 earned runs and 6 hits in 5 2/3 innings pitched. Pretty good, but the control issues, Eric, these are a red flag. 13 walks in his last 14 2/3 innings pitched. 2 wild pitches in his June 12th outing. I mean, could things get out of control here? I mean, the Landers, they're in that top tier we just talked about. Could they expose Jong here early?
Yeah, I definitely think so. The Landers were one of my top recommendations to stack on tonight's DFS cheat sheet. And that's because I just don't trust Jong at all this year. He's coming off what you have to say is his best start of the season. And even there, he walked 5 guys. Last year, I occasionally liked him as a budget daily fantasy option. Had an ERA just over 5, but did have a 19.1% strikeout rate, which was a bit better than league average. Gave him a little bit of fantasy upside. That's cratered to just a 12.6% strikeout rate this year, which is almost 4 percentage points lower than his walk rate. So not only is he walking more than he's striking out, he's doing so by a considerable margin. So I would think his 5.97 ERA could even be worse. He somehow hasn't given up a homer this season, and he still has a mark that high. He's got a whip over 2. There's just about nothing going right for him. Although, again, he is slightly better. I guess you could say his last 2 starts are comparatively good, a combined 3 earned runs, but as many walks as strikeouts in both of those. So maybe he's gone from completely unplayable to just a pretty bad 5th starter, but that's a massive gap between that and what Wilmer Font has been for basically the entire season.
Yeah, not a great look for Jong and the Eagles here. They're 9th in runs per game now, turning our attention to their offense and the lineup here. But they are averaging 5 runs per game over their last 3, so maybe they're turning things around. Imagine that'd be a tough task for them to continue with Font on the bump tonight. In terms of the Landers, they're averaging 5 runs. They're 5th in runs per game. They were shut out in game 2 against Kia, but then in games 1 and 3, they scored 16 total runs. So I'm not sure which version of the Landers we're going to get tonight. Well, what do you make of these offenses?
Yeah, I would hard avoid the Eagles against Font in daily fantasy tonight, and I would get as many Landers as I can get. I think Jung is, if not the worst pitcher on the slate, one of the worst 2. And I think there's a pretty clear gap between the bottom 2 and the rest. Really, any of the top 6 Landers hitters I like. I would probably be looking towards the lefties against Jung, but Jamie Romack and Jung Choi are both good enough. You could certainly include them too. Shin-Soo Choo should note that he didn't look necessarily as good as you would hope for a guy with his extensive MLB experience. For most of the first 2 months, he was hitting just .222 as recently as May 29th. But there was a lot of bad BABIP luck in there. Even during that poor stretch, he was still, walking as much as he was striking out or more, I think, and had a bit of power and a ton of steals, which is weird for a guy his age. And over his last 12 games, the hits have started to fall. He's hitting .395 with an OPS of 1128 over that stretch. So I think he's back to being everything you'd expect. It's rare that a KBO lineup gets 2 hitters with MLB experience. Obviously, you only have a few Korean hitters who came over briefly, like Daiho Lee and Hyun-Soo Kim. But obviously, Shin-Soo Choo's MLB track record just dwarfs basically every other former leaguer combined. So having him looking like he's supposed to is going to help the Landers a ton the rest of the way.
The former Texas Ranger, the former Cincinnati Red, is one player to look out for tonight in this SSG Landers Hanwha Eagles matchup. Moving now into the pick for the Landers Eagles matchup. We have the Landers as big favorites with the total set at 9.5. Where are we going to go, Erik?
Yeah, minus 220 favorites. I think that's accurate. I mean, Landers have a better lineup and a way better pitcher. I think this is the biggest gap between the pitchers on the slate. So very easy Landers. That'll probably be the number 1 pick. Even at those odds, I still think it's pretty good. The over-under is a lot harder because I don't think Font's going to give up much at all, but I don't trust Jung to keep the score down. I am actually going to go under, I think, on the theory that I think Font's going to hold the Eagles to 1 or 2. So even a 7-2, 8-1 still hits the under. Obviously, with the way Jung's pitched for most of the year, this could be 10-2. But I'm going to lean slightly under.
All right, going with the under 9.5 total runs and the Landers in the Landers Eagles matchup. Moving on to the next game in the slate, game 2 here. We got the Samsung Lions and the Lotte Giants facing off. Samsung won 2 of 3 against Doosan, and Lotte lost 3 of 4 against Hanwha on the other side of that series. We got Taein Wan going for the Lions. He had 2 hiccups to end May, but has been great to start June, and he's been excellent. A 1.5 ERA in 12 innings pitched. There is a little concern there on the strikeout to walk numbers. 7 strikeouts against 9 walks. Not a great look there for what should be towards an ace level talent for the Lions.
Yeah, should be is interesting because he really wasn't before this season. Granted, he was young, but ERA in the 480s the last couple of years without really much in the way of strikeouts, just 12.5% last season. But suddenly he burst out of the gate this year. He was on fire in his first was it 6 starts, had an ERA of even 1. That was obviously way better than we should have expected to sustain. But he really has been a completely different guy over his last 4. I'm not totally convinced by the low run totals in his last 2, although I do have to say he did give up just 3 hits in each of them. But as you mentioned, more walks than strikeouts over those 2 has me still a little bit worried, especially, again, coming off of those 2 where he got rocked 13 runs for 20 hits in the final 2 starts of May. So I'm still kind of viewing that as one extended stretch of shakiness, even though it's shaky in 2 dramatically different ways. If you do lump that all together, it's a 5.48 ERA, a 1.74 whip, and a 16-14 strikeout to walk ratio. So I don't think we should forget who he was at the start of the season, but he's kind of doing his best to make us do that.
Indeed. Some good numbers recently, but definitely not too long ago was rocked around. On the other side, Anderson Franco is going for the Giants. I believe it's our first time talking about Franco here on the show. He has an ERA around 4, tick over 4 in 3 June starts, 15 strikeouts against 5 walks, though. In that stretch, that's pretty nice. But he does have 7 hit batters. Again, the accuracy here for Franco might not exactly be the best when you factor in those hit batters. Yeah,
really not a particularly strong resume for him this season, which maybe isn't a surprise. I mean, guys' MLB resumes don't always exactly correlate with what they'll do in the KBO. There's factors, about how adaptable are they to life in a foreign country and that kind of thing, which you can't always predict. But Franco had just 5.1 major league innings, which is very low compared to most foreign starters. And he wasn't good at the AAA level either, a 5.97 ERA in the AAA level in 2019. So I don't think it's really a surprise that he does not look like a top-tier foreign starter at all. ERA north of 5. In his last 5 starts, it's a 4.28 ERA, 1.21 whip, which is acceptable, but nothing special. If that's who he can be going forward, he's not, an embarrassment for that foreign pitcher slot, but there's no real reason to believe he's about to, become a real asset. Just a 16.6% strikeout rate against a 10.3% walk rate on the year is just not really interesting at all.
Yeah, I will give him credit at least for being healthy. Adrian Sampson last year definitely wasn't really around for the Giants as much as they would have liked, and he's not quite on that Australia level, so maybe somewhere in between, looking to bounce back from a okay June start so far. In terms of the offense, Lotte, they are in that lower tier we talked about, but they can score. Their offense is ranked 4th in runs per game. They scored 9 last night against Hanwha. Again, it's against Hanwha, so not saying too much, but still, 9 runs is a decent amount. On the Samsung side, they are 7th in runs per game. They scored just 2 runs last night. What do we feel about these offenses here with 2 pitchers that maybe you don't always believe in?
Yeah, I would definitely be more interested, I think, in the Lions' bats, even though Taiyan Wan has been a bit shaky lately. Franco's been shaky all year. Jael O is having I don't know if it's a bounce-back season. He wasn't bad the last couple years for the Bears, but he seems to be enjoying the move to the Lions. Jose Perella obviously has been one of the top foreign hitters, top hitters, period, throughout the league, throughout the season. Sorry. For the Giants, as you mentioned, their offense is respectable despite where they sit in the standings, although they're without Daiho Lee, Chi-Hung An, and Dong Hee-han due to injuries. So normally they have, 6-ish guys who are OPS in the 800s or so. They've always had a long list of guys who are above average, but not really that star power. And that long list is a lot shorter these days, although I will mention Asyap San. He was one of the best contact hitters in the league for a decade. I think he's got 11 straight seasons where he's hitting at least 295. Last year, he finished 2nd in the batting title at, I think it was 352. This year, he was cold for much of the year, hitting in like the 260s until quite recently, but he's hitting 429 with an OPS over 1,000 in his last 10 games. But his price on DraftKings hasn't necessarily caught up to reflect that fact yet. So I've been recommending him quite a lot in recent cheat sheets. I would recommend him again tonight. Not scared enough of Taiyan Wan to keep me away from a cheap guy with a platoon advantage against him who should have a strong chance at a multi-hit night.
All right, like an all-up song on the Giants, liking Jose Perella on the Lions. One thing you mentioned about players adjusting, Jose Perella did have some time in Japan, I believe, playing professionally there. So just a guy that's taken to KBO very easily because he maybe has that international baseball feel already. Moving into the pick now for the Lions-Giants matchup here. Total set at 9.5 with the Lions as the favorite, as expected with Tae and Wan on the bump. Where are we going to go?
Yeah, I agree with the Lions being the favorite, although maybe not a huge gap. But I think with those injuries to the Giants lineup, I think the Lions have a stronger lineup. I think they have a stronger starter. Although, again, with Juan pitching worse, significantly worse than his dominance he showed early in the year, and Franco getting a little better, I think actually the gap might be smaller than it looks. I am actually going to go with the over, too, despite Juan's strong season numbers, because, again, just pretty nervous about his last 4 starts, and the Giants do still have some good bats. And also, I expect the Lions to score a decent amount against Franco.
All right, going with the Samsung Lions and the over 9.5 total runs in this matchup. Moving on to game number 3. We got the Deucin Bears taking on the KT Wiz. The Bears won last night 6-2, while the Wiz lost last night 1-9. I believe this is a 4-game set, doubleheader tomorrow. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it is a doubleheader. Then we got Miranda on the bump for the Bears tonight, though, and he has been good. 7 or more innings pitched in 3 straight starts, 5 or more strikeouts in each. Walks are down recently, too. Just a 2.9 walks per 9 over that stretch compared to almost over 4.5 per 9 on the year. I can imagine you like the way that Miranda's trending recently for this Bears team.
Yeah, the Bears really do seem to have a way with picking their foreign pitchers. Obviously, Chris Flexen pitched well enough to return to MLB last year. Raul Alcantara had a great season and won pitcher of the year and is now, I believe, in Japan. Miranda has been a strikeout force throughout the year. He's the only guy among qualified starters with a higher strikeout rate than Wilmer Font, who we talked about earlier. He's just above 30%. And he's gotten that walk rate down to 11.9%, which is still high, but not too bad. Over his first 6 starts, he was walking 3.7 batters per game. Over his last 6, he's walking just 2. So cutting the amount of walks nearly in half, which, again, like we talked about with Wilmer Font earlier, when you've got that high of a strikeout rate, that puts you in the mix for one of the best pitchers in the entire league. I think he's close to that, and I think that strikeout prowess gives him huge fantasy upside pretty much against any opponent. Has a tough matchup here. The Wiz are one of the best lineups in the league, but he can strike out 8 guys against pretty much anybody, and even if he gives up a few runs, that'll still give you a good point total.
Yeah, you see a double-digit point total there in terms of strikeouts not that long ago, and DraftKings numbers there do not lie. Looking good there for Miranda. Moving over to the other side, Jasong Bay. We talked about him last show. I liked, but I am learning to accept that he is more of a middle rotation guy. ERA just over 3 since May 1st. So that's good. And we are seeing his walks down just a tad, similar to Miranda. Warming up on Bay at all? Believing in him a little bit more? What do you see from him facing against the Bears lineup tonight?
Yeah, there's a lot more to like about him this year than last. Last year, his ERA was just under 4, but it didn't really make any sense. A strikeout rate of just 13.2% against a walk rate of 12.1% last season is not the kind of numbers that typically adds up to a pretty decent ERA. This year, the ERA is slightly better, 3.77, but his strikeout rate has shot way up to 21.5%, which is a couple ticks above league average, given that the KBO strikeout rate is significantly below where MLB's is these days. He is walking more guys. 13.8% walk rate is a lot higher than you want. But again, at least there's some reason to buy into that ERA this year. He's still being helped by a low BABIP. That's 274 this season. It was 266 last year, which I think goes a long way to explaining his success. But again, there is a lot more there than last season. I think he is a perfectly capable mid-rotation starter, which I would not have said about him last year.
I like him. He's not super young. He's not a guy born in the this century, but definitely on the younger side. So still has a little bit more time to develop and hopefully an ace. In terms of the offense here, looking at the firepower, we have quite a few options here. KT is ranked second in runs per game. Doosan is right behind them at third. KT, they have a 9-7 record against lefties, what that's worth. So maybe there's a chance you take some of those left-handed bats. Beko Gong against Miranda. I know you don't like the handedness always, but maybe there's a chance.
Yeah, I mean, Gong has been so good that you got to consider him any night, although this is probably one of the worst times to use him against Miranda, who is not only left-handed, but arguably one of the top pitchers in the league. I don't think I would be selecting any Wiz tonight, and I'm not sure I'd be selecting all that many Bears either. Not that Bay is that scary, but I think there's a pretty high number of starters you can pick on. I don't think you have to look the Bears' way. Jose Fernandez, always a fine choice. Jaewon Kim did miss last night's game. It's listed as day-to-day with a knee, so maybe stay away from him, and that shrinks the Bears' core too, which makes the rest of the guys slightly less interesting.
All right, that's what we're looking at in terms of the lineup. Moving now into the pick for the Doosan Bears against the KT Wiz. Total set at 9.5. Weird to get 3 games here with 9.5 so far, with the Bears as the favorite, of course, with Miranda on the bump. Where are we going to go?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the under. I think Miranda is really good, and I think Bay is fine. I think that should be a little bit lower. So I'm going under there. I'm going to go with the Bears, as you just predicted there with that misclick, or you just read my mind. Miranda has been that good. Now that he's cut the walks, I think he's good enough to shut down basically any lineup. He does have at least one, I think, shaky outing against these same Wiz, and he's not perfectly consistent, but I still like him better than Bay. So that's enough to push it to the Bears for me. I think that minus 134 seems pretty fair.
Yeah, May 19th against the Wiz on the road. He did give up 6 runs, 4 of those earned on 8 hits and only 4 innings pitched. But we are going with the Bears backing Miranda and the under 9.5 here. Barry noting some weird splits for Miranda there against right-handers versus against left-handers. So
that could make Beko Gong a little bit more palatable, but there's just so many other pitchers that I'd rather pick on. I don't think the Wiz skew all that heavily left-handed or right-handed either. So,
speaking of pitchers to pick on, taking a peek at that game below here, we see the total is set at 11.5. Moving now into that Kiwoom NC Dinos game. Here are some pitchers with some ugly ERAs at first glance at 4.5 and almost at 6 for Song on the Dinos side. But backing up here, Dinos, they won last night 9-1 against the Wiz. Kiwoom lost 2 of 3 against LG in the opening week series. Starting with their starter, Woojin An, guy we've talked about before. He is not good. 2 or more earned runs in 6 straight starts. An ERA close to 4.5 during that stretch. And the worst part is he has gone past 5 innings pitched just once in that 6-game start. Can't imagine he's going to be going too deep or lasting too deep against this NC Dinos offense. Anything to like about Woojin An tonight against the high-flying at Dinos offense, or not really?
Yes, this is a really interesting game. Two young pitchers with reasons to like them despite shaky ERAs. I would not say that An is not good. I would say he hasn't pitched great, but he's got talent, and he's got a major league repertoire, at least in terms of velocity. He's got a fastball that averages 93.9 miles per hour, quite high for the KBO, and a slider that sits at 87.5. So that's big lead velocity. He was great out of the bullpen last season, an ERA of an even 3, a whip just over 1, strikeout rate nearly 28%. That was, I believe, as a 20-year-old. So there's plenty of talent in his arm. Now, I wouldn't necessarily be selecting him for fantasy purposes against the best lineup in the league, but it wouldn't surprise me if he does randomly have one of his good games. I mean, he's got the potential to strike out 7-8 guys in just 5 innings. He's done that in the past. So I would say he's unreliable and could well get lit up by a lineup this good. And some walk issues do mean that he doesn't last as long in the games. I think that's some of the reason he's having short outings, the other being that he's young and wasn't a starter last year. So, yeah, I would describe him more as unreliable than not good. I think he's quite talented, but just, he's still young. got to put it together, and he hasn't done that really on the year, hasn't done that in his last couple starts. But if he does tonight, I wouldn't be all that shocked to see that he went 6 innings, gave up 1 run, and struck out 9. I think he has it in him.
All right. Well, you got that velocity. Keep in mind the KBO, they're not used to that quite high velocity among non-former major leaguers. So got something there, but he did give up 2 home runs, have to say, in his last start, and then 2 before that, another 2. So we'll see what version we get of him tonight against the Dinos offense. Turning our attention now to the opposing starting pitcher, we got Myung-Ji Song for the Dinos. He's coming off a nice start. 8 innings pitched, 7 strikeouts, 4 hits, and 2 walks. The 4 earned runs, though, mainly coming from 3 home runs he gave up. And that's kind of unusual to see a decent outing from him because he had an ERA close to 10 in the 3 starts prior to that last one. And, I mean, is this just another volatile guy? Because I see in his game log here, he could go for, 0 earned runs or 9 earned runs. I don't know which version we're going to get of him against the Heroes.
Yeah, volatile, I think, definitely describes it. He's also quite young. He's even younger. In fact, he's just 20 years old. I had a 3.70 ERA and a swingman role last year, combined an 18.3% strikeout rate with a 9.9% walk rate. Nothing special, but good enough numbers that you'd believe that he could stick in the back of a rotation. This year, those numbers are actually both trending in the right direction. 21.4% strikeout rate against just a 7.1% walk rate. If you showed me just those 2 numbers, I would expect his ERA to start with a 3. Instead, it's nearly a 6. He's getting crushed by what looks to be bad batted ball luck, a 382 BABIP. Last year had a 268 BABIP, so I think that partially explains why his ERA was so good. I think his true talent is definitely in between what he showed last year and this year. Really was not – he actually was good in his first 4 starts, 3.50 ERA, 16 runs on 23 hits over his next 2. Then, as you mentioned, 2 good outings, 6 shutout innings, and then lasting 8 innings in his last one. So most of this year he has been good. Those 2 starts are just so bad that they inflated his ERA and WHIP up to the numbers you see there. But I think he is a talented young pitcher, if, again, like On, not quite a finished product at this point.
Yes, and he has the easier task for On facing the Heroes offense that's only 6th in runs per game, and they are struggling recently as a team right now. In terms of NC, though, their offense is firing on all cylinders, as you'd expect. 1st in runs per game, 9 runs last night, as I mentioned. I think this would be a game where you could target some of these guys in DFS, bat-wise, even though there is some promise with these young arms.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I'm not scared of either pitcher, but it wouldn't surprise me if either of them happened to have one of their good days today. But I definitely think Woo Jin On is not too scary that I would avoid the Dinos' top bats. I put Sungbum Na as the top recommendation on tonight's cheat sheet. He'll get the platoon advantage. He's been hotter lately. He's having technically a down season, but his ERA or his OPS is 878 or something like that. Most of the league would be very happy to be up near that area. He's in the top 5 or 6 in homers, RBI. Even if he's not quite an MVP candidate this season, when your down year looks like this, I think obviously quite a talent. Most of the Dinos' top hitters I'd be happy to use. The Heroes have plenty of options, so I think are fine against Myung-Ji Song tonight. Gyunchang So has had a down year, but they've been keeping him in the leadoff spot lately, and he has 4 hits in his last 3. He's an on-base threat, too. He walks a ton. Jung-Hoo Lee, obviously always a strong choice. Young-Kyu Lee also, who we have expected to hit 9th. Sometimes he moves up to the leadoff spot. He's pretty inexpensive on DraftKings, just a contact hitter, but when he gets to fill that role in front of other Heroes bats instead of in front of other Eagles bats like he did for last several seasons, he becomes a lot more interesting of an option. So plenty of choices there. Whoever hits near the top of the order, I think, is very useful against Song.
Indeed, and the great thing here about rotowire.com/free KBO for our player profiles, you can see where they bat in the order. A lot of games in that 9 position, that second leadoff role, but also a lot of games in that actual leadoff role at the number 1 spot against both righties and lefties. Moving now into the pick for the Heroes Dinos game. We got that lofty total highest on the slate at 11.5, and we have the Dinos as the favorites. Where are we going with the pick?
Yeah, I think that over-under is too high. Again, I think there's something there with both pitchers. I think either of them is capable of having a strong night. Certainly, they could both be off. They've both had some real shockers this season. But I think all it takes is one of them to be the good version of themselves, and we probably hit that under. So I'm going to go under here, and I'm going to go Dinos, even though I think Woo Jin-an might have a little bit more in his repertoire. I think Myung-Gi Song has coming off a couple strong starts, and the Dinos lineup is a tier above the Heroes, tier above nearly everybody in the league. So that's enough to separate it, even if I'd give a slight edge to On in a vacuum.
All right, going with the under 11.5 and the Dinos in this matchup. Moving on right along to the final game on the 5-game slate, again, 5:30 a.m. Eastern, is the Kia Tigers against the LG Twins. Kia lost 2 of 3 against the Landers, and the Twins won 2 of 3 against Kiwoom in their opening week series. Yushin Kim for the Tigers doesn't work very deep into games, had a mop-up duty the other day in that Landers series. 9 walks against 8 strikeouts. Anything notable here about Kim?
Yeah, not a whole lot to like here. 22-year-old lefty. His only previous experience prior to this year was 13 innings where he had a 9.69 ERA in 2018. It's not a whole lot better this year in 7 starts and 1 relief appearance. ERA of 8.42, as you see there, 1.77 whip. Striking out just 12.7% of opposing batters while walking 15.5%. There's just nothing at all to like here. His last start came against these very same Twins, and he gave up 7 runs. You always like the offense when they're facing a pitcher twice in a pretty recent time span. They've all seen him. They know what his pitches do. So that's even more reason not to like him tonight. Tigers really, they're struggling pretty much all over. Even their guys who were supposed to be good are now injured. Both Aaron Brooks and Daniel Mengden, their 2 foreign starters, both of whom I actually quite like, are injured right now. So they need Kim, I guess, to stick in the rotation, even though he certainly wouldn't be there if they could at all help it.
Yeah, tough time. Hopefully we don't see either of those guys, Mengden or Brooks, cut, as we've seen some other KBO teams have a short leash with guys that get injured. Sorry about that. LG Twins, they got Woo-Chan Cha going for them, a 1.8 ERA in a very small sample size. But if you want a reason to believe, he's got 10 strikeouts and against just 5 walks. Want a reason to hate, he had an ERA over 5.5 last year, or just tick over 5.34 to be exact. So I'm not sure. Are you a fan of Woo-Chan Cha this year, or is it too small of a sample to really say?
I think he's probably going to be a solid number 4 or 5 starter type. He's a veteran with a long career. Most of his seasons aren't anything special, but he has some great ones. If you go all the way back to 2010, he had an ERA of 2.14. So that was the potential he showed, over a decade ago. Nearing the back end of his career, 34 years old now. Wasn't good last year, although it was just 13 starts and his season got cut short by a shoulder injury. So you wonder perhaps if there were some signs of that even before he was shut down. Had a fine ERA last year, or the year before that, in the low 4s. The reason he's only made 2 starts this year is because he missed the start of the year while rehabbing that injury. So not a ton to go on from his starts this season, but the fact that he's gone 5 innings in both and has been completely fine in both gives me reason to believe he'll be fine against a very shaky Tigers lineup tonight.
That's what we're looking at in terms of the pitchers, in terms of offense. Kia is struggling, like you said, dead last in runs per game at 10th. Again, there's only 10 teams in the league, so that is dead last. LG Twins, they're 8th in runs per game. But before last night, they actually only had games where they scored a win where they scored 4 more runs, and none of those. So long story short, they're not doing too well when they win. Even when they win, they're not scoring a ton of runs. What do we think of the bats here? Preston Tucker, I mean, he's a guy, but this Tigers team is struggling.
Yeah, there's not a lot to like on the Tigers, and most of their best hitters bat left-handed. so I'm not really interested in them against Cha tonight. Tucker's a lefty. Hyung-Woo Choi is injured and left-handed, so multiple reasons not to select him. Oh, and a third reason is that he's been very bad this season too after winning the batting title last year. So I don't see any reason to really look at any of the Tigers. The Twins on the opposite side were one of my stack recommendations tonight, given how weak Houston Kim has been all year. More of the Twins' better hitters are more... Just trying to throw me off there with some Mel Rojas talk. Yeah, Hyung-Woo Choi was the guy who robbed Mel Rojas Jr. of the Triple Crown last season, but just has been awful and injured most of this year. Twins, on the other side, most of their top hitters, or a decent number of their top hitters, are lefties. Hyun-Soo Kim. Roberto Ramos actually is out with a back injury right now, so I guess that's slightly less true than normal. But I don't think you have to be too scared of the lefties tonight, given that I don't think Houston Kim is going to throw very many innings. He'll probably face the top of the order just about twice. So I like most of the Twins' top hitters, especially Yoon-Sung Chae, who is a righty and having quite a strong year leading the team, I think, in homers, RBI, right up there at the top in OPS. So he'd be the top guy, but I'd be happy with most of their top hitters.
All right, liking the Twins there against Kim and that ugly ERA 0-4 on the year as well. Kia Tigers, LG Twins, total set at 9.5 with the Twins as the favorite with Woo-Chan Cha on the bump. Where are we going with the pick?
Yeah, the Twins being massive favorites is correct here. Better lineup, even if it's not a great one. Much better pitcher, even if Woo-Chan Cha is nothing special. And the over-under is an interesting one because Houston Kim gets lit up all the time, and I think that's enough for me to pick the over, especially because Woo-Chan Cha I don't think is great. I think he's just a fine starter. That might be good enough to allow just one run against the Tigers, given how poorly they're hitting. But I'm still going to lean slightly to the over here.
All right, going with the LG Twins and the over at 9.5 in the Tigers-Twins matchup. And that is all 5 of the games on the KBO slate tonight/tomorrow morning. Now we're going to our top 3 picks. What are our top 3 picks from the entire slate? The 3 best we feel are going to cash. Erik, where are we going? I think I have an idea where this is going to head, but tell me number 1. Where are we going?
Yeah, so 1 and 2 in some order. We'll go it in this order. I think we're going to go Landers over Eagles. Just a massive gap between the 2 starters. Wilmer Font in the mix for the best starter in the league this season. Siwon Jong has been very shaky throughout the year. Whip north of 2, more walks than strikeouts. So that's 1. Number 2 is going to be the one we just talked about. Also a massive gap in starters, even though Woo-Chan Cha is nowhere near as good as Wilmer Font. Houston Kim has been that shaky, just has no business being in a rotation. He's only in there because of injuries, and the Tigers have done nothing offensively. So those 2, I think, are a big step above all the rest. For number 3, what's in the mix? I'm thinking about the under in the Heroes Dinos, possibly, just because it's so high and I like something about both hitters. But the Dinos lineup, picking an under with them, that's tough to do. Might go Bears because I love Miranda a lot more than just Hung Bae. That's in the mix too. And potentially the Lions, given that the Giants are beat up. But I think I'm going to go Bears for this one. I think either of the other 2 would be fine choices. But I think Ariel Miranda, like Wilmer Font, is in the mix as top pitcher in the league this season now that he's got the walks under control. We've got the 2 highest strikeout arms in the entire league among qualified hitters in Miranda and Font. And even with Jisung Bae being better than he was last year, he's still somewhat shaky. 2 pretty similar lineups. So I think I'm going to keep faith in Miranda here.
All right, liking it. The Deuce Bears over the KT Wiz because Ariel Miranda. Top 3 picks on the slate, the SSG Landers over the Hanwha Eagles, the LG Twins over the Kia Tigers, and the Deuce Bears over the KT Wiz. Some other ones to consider, Samsung Lions. I know Barry liked that one in there. And the under 11.5 potentially in that Dinos Heroes matchup. But be aware that the Dinos do have the number 1 offense. So see what they can cook up tonight against Wujin On. But those are the top 3 picks. In case you missed anything, the full replay of today's show with each game by game breakdown and a standings rundown will be available on YouTube, Periscope, on our Twitter page, and on Twitch. So be sure to check that out. And that is all we have for you today. Do want to shout out real quick, Jared Hoying back in Major League Baseball. Blue Jays added him to the roster. Pretty crazy because he was not good with the Eagles.
Yeah, well, he was good for a couple of years, but yeah, I think he hit in the 190s last year and was cut midseason. You don't really expect a 33-year-old, whatever he is, to step up a level after that, but who knows? I think he's only up briefly with Teoscar Hernandez on the paternity list, but good for him getting back in there. Also, one quick thing, somebody asked in the chat earlier about a parlay, if it's ever good to parlay. I mean, it totally is just depends on whether or not you think the odds look a lot better in a parlay. I think something like tonight, where the Landers and Twins are both huge favorites correctly, I think you can get maybe a better payout if you do both. So I think that's potential candidate, but it's totally dependent on given odds night to night. I think it's acceptable if it's the kind of thing you like. And it's tough to answer with much more detail than that, unfortunately. But
there we go. But we do like the Landers. We do like the Twins. And that's where we're going with for the top 2 picks. The other one, Tucson Bears. All right. Great, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, rotowire.com/free KBO and follow us on Twitter @RotowireKBO. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody.